my fellow Americans, are we reaping our harvest of greed? Have we built our house on sinking sand? Why are we being ugly Americans?
Welcome to Weekdays Live. I'm CJ Holmes, your host for the show today, and also founder of Homeowners for Justice, committed to not resting until we bring these banksters to justice. What I want to share today is really good bad news. The good news is it's being said more and more and more. The truth is coming out. I'm going to show you some things today that are being said and done in the news. And of course, the links will be there on the comments after the show so that you'll be able to look at them, send out the links, send out the show. We must make our effort viral. That's the only way. It's only the people have to rise up. So we're going to talk about government gone wild. Some of these just are really something else. How the government has been bought off, the inequality in the housing gap, other things in the news, and then I'm going to end with We the People. You may or may not have seen this already on YouTube. I want to make sure it's in the live stream archives, and I also want to talk real briefly about what they say to do and how we might be able to connect into that effort and expand that effort and get ideas. I'm looking for ideas. We're always looking for how can we really get 1 million people, 11 million, even 100,000 people to actually do the same thing. If we could coordinate that, that's the answer, is to actually get that coordinated effort across the country. So let's start. Government gone wild. If you haven't seen this, oh boy, are you in for a treat.
This is Blazing Goalie again for another installment of Government Gone Wild. You know, we keep on hearing that if we want to get Congress back on track to representing us, that we need to get the special interests out of politics, and I wholeheartedly agree. But what most fail to realize is that government itself is its own special interest and will do and or say almost anything to protect itself. Now stay tuned, because at the end of this video I'm going to show you why our freedoms may be at stake if we don't cut government soon. Our federal government has seen an explosion in its size over the last 10 years, and both political parties are to blame for this. How big has it grown? Over the last decade, the number of private sector employees has grown only 1%. But the number of federal government employees has grown 15%. We are now out of the era of big government and into the era of enormous government. Basically, Congress used this recession to expand government and entrench government workers. When this recession started, while you are worrying about paying the bills and keeping a roof over your family's head, the Transportation Department had just one employee making over $170,000 a year. Today, that number is 1,690 employees. When this recession started, while you are worrying about keeping your job and putting food on your table, the Department of Defense had 1,868 employees making over $150,000 a year. Today, that number is 10,100 employees. In fact, when this recession started, the number of federal employees making more than $100,000 a year doubled in less than 2 years. And when you include salary and benefits, the average total compensation for a private sector employee in 2009 was $61,000. Now, take a guess what the average total compensation for a federal government employee was in 2009. A whopping $123,000, more than double that in the private sector. Do you really think these people will vote against any spending cuts? Now, this is the important part. There are approximately 21,300,000 300,000 government employees in this country. We'll talk about special interest. About 16% of this nation's voting electorate works for government. And most people have at least one person close to them, like a spouse, who will vote with them in an effort to keep their job. Well, that means at least 32% of the voting electorate will come out and vote against anyone who talks openly about spending cuts. And when that number hits 50%, well, it's game over, folks. And then we, the people, will be in the permanent minority. And therein lies the hidden danger of big government. Now, the only way we can make a difference is if people hear this message. Please forward this video to everyone you know before we wake up one day and it's too late. Well, that's it for this edition of Government Gone Wild. Be sure to visit our website and sign up for our email updates and become a fan on Facebook and suggest it to all of your friends.
So what do you think about that? And what he didn't talk about is that all the people on government paychecks, Social Security, disability, others, state workers, our police, teachers, firefighters, all of these folks are on government payroll. They're not employees per se, but they are getting money from the government. It's an amazing story to hear. I want you to absorb that and rewatch that if you need to get some of those numbers straight. We need to. This is really a crisis, and when you've got these many people on government jobs making twice what private sector is, and as you already know, thousands, millions have lost their homes, lost their money, lost their retirement, lost the down payments. So the private sector has been really crushed and weakened, while the government employment sector is just mushrooming. This is a really bad sign. Here it is, actually the way it works. I love these, and I want to remember again, it is not about Republican or Democrat or independent or progressive. It's about what are the people doing. Stop listening to what they say they belong to. Start looking at what they're doing. Start analyzing who is for the people and who aren't.
So if our economic predicament is not President Obama's fault, whose then is it? The answer is not just President Bush. The question is not at all academic, because unless Americans see what happened, the same people who broke the system then will succeed in keeping it broken now for their own gain. The key here that financial firms and their executives are not synonymous, that executives got rich by risking their companies, not so much by breaking the rules, but rather by breaking the system of rules, systematically rewriting them over decades, hoping to muddy the waters about culpability now to prevent the return of those rules later. A report from the nonpartisan Wall Street Watch project reveals that the deregulation was bought and paid for by Wall Street executives, paying politicians, buying unprecedented freedom from Washington oversight, specifically Wall Street, meaning banks, security firms, private equity and hedge funds, insurance and real estate. In just the past 10 years, they spent more than $5 billion to push Washington out of the way. From 1998 through last year, spending $3,441 million on lobbying, employing 2,996 D.C. lobbyists last year, not counting untold lobbyists in the 50 individual states. They put 142 former Washington officials on their lobbying payrolls. They spent $1.7 billion in direct campaign contributions. And here's what they bought. In 1998, Citibank was allowed to merge with the insurance giant Travelers, even though it was literally against the law for that to happen. Citibank won an exemption because everybody knew they were about to get the law changed anyway. A year later, Congress obliged, killing the landmark Depression-era Glass-Steagall Act, which had erected the wall between regulated Main Street banks and unregulated investment banks. Without that wall, the stage was set for firms to merge until they were, quote, too big to fail, and to sink the money from your checking and your savings accounts into risky new derivatives. Regulators let firms hide those risky investments off their books, which meant they did not have to keep enough money on hand to cover possible losses. All of this permitted by the Financial Accounting Standards Board in rules pushed for by the bank executives. When a Clinton regulatory agency said, hey, we want oversight on these derivatives, Clinton's own Treasury Secretary, a Goldman Sachs veteran, said no, In 2000, then Senator Phil Gramm, John McCain's reported choice to be Treasury Secretary had he been elected, got legislation through Congress signed by President Clinton that set derivatives free from virtually any regulation. In 2004, the Bush SEC scrapped a 20-year-old rule that made banks keep a certain amount of cash on hand to cover investment losses. So who decided now how much cash the banks had to keep on hand? The banks did. That new rule pushed by Goldman Sachs and its chairman, Henry Paulson, future Treasury Secretary for Mr. Bush and star of the bailout crisis. Why would Wall Street executives push for all this change? With derivatives deregulated, financial whizzes could turn bets on just about anything into a derivative. And they did, including mortgages. Once they could turn mortgages into derivatives, they had every incentive to make even the worst mortgages. Yes, predatory lending, because they could turn them into derivatives too, and then sell those things to somebody else. Of course, no financial firm would buy a derivative based on a predatory mortgage because then they could also be sued by the borrower, correct? Well, no. Wall Street accomplices like Congressman Bob Ney blocked efforts to let the victims of predatory lending sue everybody who profited from it and leaving Wall Street executives with virtually nothing to risk by pushing the worst mortgages imaginable and millions to gain by using the exploding paper value of mortgage derivatives to win big bonuses of real money for themselves. All of this fueling the housing bubble as mortgage brokers and lenders told the worst borrowers, sign on the dotted line. And the regulators who could have stopped it? According to Wall Street Watch, from 2002 to 2007, the Federal Reserve took a grand total of 3 formal actions against subprime lenders. From 2004 to 2006, the Bush Treasury Secretary or Comptroller of the currency took a grand total of 3 consumer protection enforcement actions. He wrote a new rule to stop states from enforcing their own consumer protection laws, and he used a clause from a law passed in 1863 to nullify state anti-predatory lending laws. That's all over with Republicans out of power, right? Except that Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner's chief of staff is a former Goldman Sachs lobbyist. Another Goldman Sachs veteran, Gary Gensler, is Mr. Obama's choice to head that same regulatory agency that once tried to oversee derivatives, but who, at his hearing last month, refused to apologize for having opposed regulation of derivatives. And except that, as of 2008, Democrats now get more Wall Street money than do Republicans. And according to the newspaper The Hill, big banks getting bailout money gave politicians more than $250,000 just from November 25th to the end of this January. And then there is government's flip side, when it takes its ability to regulate things out of existence for puritanical or worse political reasons. And people don't just lose their homes, they lose their lives. There's no telling if Christopher Reeve could have been saved by stem cell research. He died just 3 years and 2 months after George Bush stopped American stem cell research dead in its tracks. But are you?
And so it goes. And so it goes. The fact of the matter is, the money is against the people because the money can make so much money by fraud. Fraud as a business model is very, very lucrative, and it just cheats everybody else out of their wealth, and it sucks it to them. It's exactly, I thought what Keith said is exactly right. He speaks so fast, it's hard to grasp all those numbers and the point and all the parties that are playing. But there's some really key things here, and one is Treasury secretaries are always Goldman Sachs connected. Here's a little article that we can look at. Citigroup man goes to the Treasury Department, and I'm going to link this, you can read it, but one of the key things, it's all about Jacob Lew, we talked about that last week, but I wanted to point out right here, Rubin connection. This is a former Treasury Secretary, Robert Rubin. He seems, it says right here, there seems to be an unwritten rule that every Treasury Secretary must have deep ties to Rubin. The point is, it's all a game. It's a connected game. We're out, they're in, and we can change this game. That's why I say things like we've got to change the game. We've lost this game. It's over. Not only does the government not want to, regulate them, and I'm going to show you a couple other articles and things today just about that, but they want to enhance and help them. Obviously, it's a revolving door. And everyone, every personal person is looking out for themselves. And that's one of the big problems. They've stopped representing the people. They're in it for their own gain. Many of them are. Not everyone. But we need to start looking at who's there for the people, who's there for themselves. This is a very interesting little video about exactly the inequality of the housing gap. It's pretty dramatic.
Welcome back. I'm Melissa Harris Perry. This has got me irritated. The magazine Bloomberg Business Week found itself in a bit of a racial pickle on Thursday when images of its new cover went viral, and I just can't imagine why. The cover, as you can see, teases a story about the great American housing rebound, and guess who is shown benefiting? Yep, the grinning, barefooted black man clutching mad loot, among other assorted characters and with exaggerated racial features. Can't quite figure out how he has all that money but none to buy shoes. Okay, it is not a good look for Business Week, something they already know because the magazine did apologize on Thursday for this cover. But it's not so much the grinning, bug-eyed Sambo with a new home, it's the lie that it represents, namely that whatever housing crisis there was short-lived, and that those are the minorities back out there who are making out like bandits. Now, we all know that the reality is much different. The subprime mortgage crisis, which disproportionately hit those same homeowners, only served to exacerbate what was already a systemic inequity in America's housing market. A new study out this week from the Institute on Assets and Social Policy at Brandeis University underscored just how unequal things have become. Tracing 1,700 households over 25 years, the study found that the wealth gap between white and African American families has widened exponentially, increasing from $85,000 in 1984 to more than $236,000 in 2009. And here's what the gap looks like. It's a gap that grew during an era in which the black middle class also grew, and when many more African American students, including me, went to and graduated from college. So what gives? The study cites many reasons, including an education gap, unemployment, but also the number which is the key one, which is about how many years a household has owned a home and what kind of house it was. According to the study's findings, of all the contributing factors, the duration of home ownership was the biggest wedge of all, driving that wealth gap ever wider. And as the Atlantic's Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote of the study this week, black-white inequality has been, for most of American history, a public policy. Joining us to break down more of the study's findings is one of its primary authors.
We're going to let you follow